This is Donna Paris from In the Black Canada, and you're logged on to Black Nova Scotia News, because there's always more to the story.
Last question, I guess I'll ask. Are there any stories from Nova Scotia that you've told, any podcast stories that stand out the most to you? Which ones?
Well, I think the story for me about Nova Scotia is how much family I myself have that I don't know. The very first person on my podcast, his name is Leonard Paris. He's out of New Glasgow. And Chad Lucas from Lucasville had said to me, have you heard about Len Paris? He wrote a book called Jim Crow, also lived here. It's about growing up black and poor in New Glasgow, Nova Scotia, outside of New Glasgow. And I said I hadn't heard of him, but I went on his website and I reached out to him and I got his book. And as I'm flipping through his book, I see, that's my Aunt Nina. I realized, turns out that my grandfather's sister was his grandmother. So we were related and didn't know it. And so it was lovely. And since then, I've met so many other people. Charles Jackson, he reached out to me. He was going to do a podcast. He was interested in doing the same kind of thing that I'm doing. And he saw the name Donna Paris and he said, let me call her up and see what she's all about. Turns out his grandfather was my grandfather's brother. So the story for me is just how much my own family history is embedded in this, bigger picture of history in Canada, Nova Scotia, and throughout the rest of Canada. So I think that's the thing that stands out the most for me. And I should tell you, because this is one of the biggest parts of the story, my grandfather was Joseph Alexander Paris, and he was part of the No. 2 Construction Battalion. The battalion they just gave the apology last year. Well, my grandfather was on the Canada Post stamp. If anybody wants to look, they can see he's second from the left, and that was my grandfather. I did not know that story as a little girl. I'm not even sure if my father and his siblings knew that story. And a lot of people didn't until Senator Calvin Ruck wrote the book, Canada's Best Kept Military Secret, the No. 2 Construction Battalion. When he wrote that book and people started hearing about these stories, and then more people would say, yeah, I had a grandfather in No. 2 Construction. And so that's been great, being able to be a part of that story and to see that story come through with an apology from the Prime Minister and the Minister of Defense. And we weren't here for that last year. We were in Edmonton collecting other stories, but it was great to see that happened. So,
when and how did you learn about your grandfather's involvement?
Well, it was through the book. My father had got the book and he passed it on to me. And then I came down, I think in 2009 might have been the first time they do a sort of a celebration every year in Pictou, and that would have been the first time that I would have come down for that. And it was great to be there and be a part of it. But yeah, I didn't know that story. And so proud to see my grandfather. When I look at the picture and I think he's probably 17, 18 years old, I think they lied about their age to get included. And, he would have had no idea that 100 years hence he would have been celebrated on a Canada Post stamp.
And did you ever meet him? Do you have memories?
I knew my grandfather. He died when I was about 16 years old. He was born in Mulgrave, Nova Scotia, down in Guysborough County. And we would go there as kids to visit my grandfather and my grandmother and my father. There was 9 of them. And then my grandmother died when my father was very young. And my grandfather remarried. And they had 5 more children. And so when my father and his siblings were having their children and us, my grandfather was having a second family. So we would go down and visit them a lot. And so I did know him. I have pictures of myself with him. And I wish I'd known that story then.
He never mentioned it.
He never talked about it. And this is a theme we're finding with these stories. When we interview descendants, I say, did you know about this when you were young? No, didn't know anything about it. Or a few people know. They might have diaries from a great aunt that kept track of things, but most people didn't know. And when you're a kid, you're not asking those questions. When you're really young, you're just going out playing and having fun, and you're not thinking about, I should ask this great aunt something, or I should ask this grandfather something. And people didn't talk about it. People out west say they were just too busy trying to keep their heads above water, trying to do stuff with the land, and so they weren't really talking about what had happened to them. And I find that that's true across the country. Lots of people say, I never knew. They never talked about it.
There's a lot of narratives about, coming back to Canada and still, being second class by virtue of being black. Do you think, or do you know or think that maybe some of the reason that they didn't talk about it was maybe a shame for having done it in the first place?
I don't think they felt shame for having gone, but they certainly felt shame. I don't know, it wasn't shame, but they weren't treated well. First of all, they applied and were told, Canada doesn't want a checkerboard army. We don't want you. And then they sent them as a construction group because, my grandfather was a sapper, dug the ditches, did the roads, did the forestry, all of that kind of stuff. They weren't treated well while they were there, and they weren't treated well when they came back. So why would you want to talk about that, right? So I think that was probably, a piece of it. They just wanted to put it away and not think about it. And I think that's not uncommon, not just for Black people, but for Indigenous people as well. The terrible things that happen. Why would you want to talk about it? People think, I don't want to visit that again. But I think what I'm finding is when people finally get a chance to talk and tell the story, it's really cathartic for them. It's really, and people like to be asked. It's funny, people don't want to talk about it, didn't want to talk about it, but they like to be asked and they like to tell the stories now. And lots more people are digging through their ancestry and trying to find out who they came from and where they came from. And that's what started me. I really always wanted to know, where did I come from? On my mother's side, I have a great-grandfather who came from Ireland. And I always say, he didn't know me, of course. I wasn't born when he was alive. But he was thinking about me because he was thinking about the future. And I am the future that he would have been thinking about in trying to build a better life in Nova Scotia to make things better for his family. He was thinking about me in the future. And, part of this work that I do, I hope someday my great-great-great-grands will look back and say, oh, our grandmother, she was thinking about us. She was thinking about the future by making sure that we know these stories and that this history is not lost. So that's part of why I do this as well.